Hello. Good evening. I'm Oz Katerji, and this is the Oz Katerji Show, streaming for the first time on Twitter as well as on Twitch. I know that some of you refuse to migrate over. Hello. But because we're doing the Epstein Files and Trump, and with all that buzzing around at the moment, we thought we'd put this one on Twitter. So hello, Twitter. I refuse to call it X. But I know that lots of people clicking on here won't have heard of me because they've just seen it by looking through Epstein stuff on Twitter. Welcome. And if you're watching along on YouTube, welcome again. Really appreciate you following along the show and hitting like and subscribe if you enjoy the content. A lot of news swirling around at the moment about Donald Trump and Jeffrey Epstein and the Epstein Files. And it's a situation which seems to be tearing Trump's MAGA base apart. They believed that Trump was one of their moral crusaders on this topic, and they seem to be rather taken aback by the fact that seeing what's taking place. Well, I don't want to go into it in too much detail because we have a guest on that's been following all of this with close attention. And he is an investigative journalist. He's also a very dear friend of mine. He has 2 Pulitzer Prizes. That's how good of an investigative journalist he is. And his name is James Ball, and he follows along with all of this kind of stuff. If you want to know about what kind of conspiracies are driving the minds of the online right mad at the moment, you can find few better informed on the topic than my esteemed friend James Ball. So without further ado, I'll introduce him. Hello, James. Welcome to the show.
Hi there, and hello from my cat that has picked this exact moment to come back into shot.
Well, what's the cat's name?
Cersei and her brothers Jamie, and yes, obviously they're named after those 2.
See, I did know that, but I have met your cats before, but I felt like I did want to embarrass you on the on the stream so everyone knows how dated your cats are.
Well, they're quite old now, but also they have been done by the vet, so we don't have any Game of Thrones funny business in here.
I will say that my cat Zaytuni, which means olive in Arabic, is being put down on Monday. So very sad about that. My family's cat, that is, that I don't have it with me. So rest in peace, Zaytuni. You were a beautiful, wonderful little companion. But yeah, we are not here to talk about our furry feline friends. We're here to talk about.
But sorry to hear that.
Oh, it's okay. You know that cats, they live and die. He had a very, very happy, healthy, 14, 15 years, whatever it was on this planet. So, here's to you, little guy. Let's talk about what's going on. First of all, introduce yourself because people might not know who you are. Hello again, everyone. Welcome to the show. And if you're watching along for the first time and you find what I say interesting or what James says interesting, please consider liking along and helping the channel grow, because we can see we're just a very small show starting out. I can already see we've got 900 viewers. That's the power of the Twitter followers immediately jumping on. I'm sorry, Twitch. I know I've been exclusive so far. We're going to stay Twitch exclusive, but this is just a teaser for people on Twitter to see what they're missing out on if they refuse to click those links, which has been a real problem for content creators trying to get anyone to look at their work in recent years on social media, as the sort of, I think, was it Facebook that basically ruined everything for everyone. And ever since then, it's just been like trying to get anyone to click through on anything has been a nightmare. So anyway, without further ado, James, tell us about you and yourself, and then we'll dive into the subject at hand.
Yeah, so I'm a journalist, been a journalist for more than 15 years. I've worked at The Guardian, at The Washington Post, at BuzzFeed. I used to work at WikiLeaks. Julian Assange would say that I'm a terrible person and a spy. I would tell you I'm not a spy. That's a whole thing of its own. But I've covered all of Chelsea Manning's leaks, so the Iraq war logs, the state cables, all of that. I was one of the reporters on the Snowden team. I worked on the offshore leaks and the Panama Papers.
2 Pulitzers.
a share of 2 Pulitzers, but we can count it. And I did a small bit of the Epstein story. It was my reporting that the first time that Prince Andrew was named in the court documents, all the way back in 2015. One thing that people almost miss with this story is it has run for decades. And part of that is it's taken decades to get any kind of truth out. It's taken decades for anything to happen with it. As you say, a lot of what I do, I write books as well. I write about conspiracy theories. This one is a conspiracy. There were a lot of rich and very powerful people involved. There will be someone and like who has gone to Epstein Island, who was friends with Epstein. He was an amazing sucker up to the rich. He was an amazing collector of people. And it doesn't mean every one of them was involved in his crimes, of course. And all of them say they were in the group that weren't. But, Bill Clinton, Naomi Campbell, Stephen Hawking, you name them, they've all been on his planes. So the story's never been as neat as some people wanted it to be.
Yeah, I mean, look, it's that's what this whole issue with the Epstein files is really. Like, there seems to be, and again, you're going to teach me stuff because this isn't something I follow much at all. But really, the Epstein files are perceived to be by the sort of wider conspiratorial public to be a sort of blackmail files that Epstein had on his rich, powerful, elite friends, being engaged in criminal acts that he was using to, manipulate, so on and so forth. Is the reality that the Epstein files is just his contact book and just a random series of investments and people? It's a very rich person. Like, is there truth to the idea that the Epstein files is a blackmail plot? Because I don't know if that has been substantial. As I said, I haven't really spent much time reading. I found the whole thing very sordid and gross, and it's just not one of the stories that I tend to want to read up too much about. But here we are, so you can I can be the audience's ignorance because I really am ignorant on this topic.
I mean, would you like the prologue? Would you like the bit on who this guy is and how he got rich? Because I think people don't tend to know that.
Sure, give us the whole story. Started with, we've got nothing but time. It's a long show. I've got a bottle of Coke here. Let's just go.
Key thing with Jeffrey Epstein is he kind of started from not very much. And that's always been part of what makes it weird. And it's what makes it always feel like nothing much adds up. The ultimate thing about this man is he is good at toadying to rich people. He is good at befriending rich people. And he was very good at then using that to his advantage. And so the sort of start out of Epstein is the late 70s. And he was a school teacher. And genuinely, he taught at an elite private school in New York. And he was a science teacher, and he was a good teacher and clearly a very clever guy. And basically, the dad of one of his class was the chairman of Bear Stearns, the bank, the finance company. And so he got himself hired by Bear Stearns because they were like, why is a guy as clever as you, teaching in a school? You should be making loads of money in a bank. And so he worked for Bear Stearns. He's another product of the financial sector. Thank you, them. But he didn't last very long, and he didn't get very senior. He never made full partner. He got up to limited partner, which is like one step below becoming a partner before he really made it. And he left really abruptly in 1981. And
were there acrimonious circumstances to his departure?
Yes. And again, no one is really very sure as to why. At one point, it was claimed, he claimed he quit to sort of do his own money kind of thing. Another thing sounded like it was he claimed he'd been sleeping with a secretary, and that was why he got fired at one stage, or he said there was a rumor that was why he got fired. It looks to have been an insider trading deal. And it looks like he tried to do a favor to a rich friend about a deal he knew was happening. And the bank kind of was going to get in trouble for it. It wasn't very much money, and it was all sorted out so that he left, but he still got his bonus. And so he went off and started his own company. And it didn't do very well. Like, he bounced along for the early 80s, making what I think me and you would regard as better money than journalism does, but nothing very impressive, nothing very clever. And then he made another sort of rich friend and got a gig as a consultant for $25,000 a month. And again, this is a sort of messy mid-80s scandal that no one's quite at the bottom of. But basically, his friend ended up in the middle of a sort of deal gone wrong, and then seemed to have done a Ponzi scheme to get out of it. And there was a suggestion that it was Epstein who constructed the Ponzi scheme and suggested he do it so that he didn't have to own up to the investors that he'd lost all their money. But when the authorities came, this guy got sentenced to 20 years in jail. Epstein had just been a consultant. His name wasn't on the documents. He hadn't done it. He sort of stepped back. And so this guy went to jail for 20 years. Epstein sort of came out free and clear. And by the late 80s, he had this amazing new friend in Leslie Wexler, who is still with us, and who was a big sort of retail magnate. Victoria's Secret's probably what he's most famous for, which gets us quite close to Epstein world. And he essentially became Wexler's money manager. And he got so in with Wexler that he literally at one point fired Wexler's mom from a charitable board. And this guy was notoriously aggressive. He would get into every bit of Wexler's business, every bit of his dealings. He took over procuring his yacht and then ended up suing the yacht provider. The house that Epstein famously sort of lived in New York, the biggest private residence in New York, it was Wexler that actually bought that at first. There was lots of murkiness over whose money was whose. But sort of through this relationship, he got to know other rich people. And Epstein's version of the story before his sort of first downfall was that he was really great at handling money for the ultra rich. He wouldn't touch anything under $1 billion. He actually looks to have been a lot more small time than that. He didn't have loads of clients. He didn't have loads of stuff. And a lot of what he did was actually chasing up deals gone bad. If someone fell out with their lawyers or with a private investigator, he'd try and get the money back. He was one of very, very few people to actually have a firearms license to carry in New York. If you're neither of us are American, you tend to think that every American carries guns and is cool with guns. New York City, no one's got them. They're like us. It's weird if you see someone with a gun. It is really hard to have a carry permit there. Epstein had one. And so he always had sort of one foot a little bit in the underworld. He always had this kind of BS, but he got these powerful friends. And then he hit on the jackpot with Wexler, who was worth about $3 billion. $3 billion in the 80s is real money. And through them made other friends and sort of built up this respectable thing. So he was legitimately a massive science nerd. He loves physicists. He would get physicists over for ages. He sponsored loads of labs. Epstein actually had an office in Harvard. He endowed a center that was named after him, and he had an office in there, which again, at the time was seen as this guy just loves science that much. He wants that. You wonder, was there access to people involved? Was there access to young students there? Who knows? And I don't think we've ever had as good answers as we could on that. But in his schmoozing era, he went on the board of the Rockefeller Center. And if you look at articles from the time, there is a lot of stuff about how he's a party boy, how he likes his women. He's a very eligible bachelor. He likes young women. And there's an amazing Vanity Fair article from 2003. A lot of what I'm telling you is from that. And there's this really bizarre sort of article where it talks about how all of his parties have loads of young women in them. There's loads more women than men. A lot of the women are Russian or are foreign and are in very weird outfits. There's one where someone talks actually about Prince Andrew having been at one. But Epstein really started to get noticed and maybe flew too close to the sun when he had flown sort of Bill Clinton and a couple of others out to this island very visibly. And when you start hanging out with former presidents, people really notice. And so a lot of what was happening with Epstein, you read stuff at the time, bits of it were hiding in plain sight. And he always used to brag. He'd be like, he would be very, very aggressive if anyone was reporting on him. He would threaten reporters' families. He'd say, I won't just sue you. I won't just come after you. I'll come against your whole family. I'll come against all of that. He would buy up and befriend everyone. He was very lavish with gifts. But there was a real element of hiding in plain sight in that it was never a secret that he liked parties. It was never a secret he liked young women. It was never a secret he'd be surrounded with what people would call girls. And so, there was this real odd vibe around him. He'd risen from nowhere. No one quite knew where his money came from. No one quite understood what he did. But everyone knew he had powerful friends. So that's kind of your Epstein prologue. That's as fast a version as I could do it. It wasn't that fast. Sorry.
Oh no, don't worry. As I said, we got nothing but time. But so he's already a shady kind of character, but one that. Also, I mean, we have to be fair. The 80s and 90s were a different time culturally, where Seinfeld comes to mind. Mind you, there was a public reaction to Seinfeld as well, but again, it was kind of there was sort of a status attached to men who could be with women who were younger than them. As gross as that was it a product of the time, or were there suspicions about him? From the very early days, or because obviously he was eventually convicted, right? So how did we get from this character who's got dodgy dealings and is always surrounded by girls, as you said, to being someone who is suspected of child sex trafficking?
Yeah, and so this is where we need to get into what child sex trafficking actually looks like versus the sort of QAnon conspiracy theory movie version. And in these sort of movie versions, a group of people get together and say, right, let's kidnap 10-year-olds from nice suburban households, take them out, rape them, and then murder them in a satanic ritual. That's how QAnon would have you think it happens. What happened with Epstein, and what sort of happens in other cases like this, is that things start in a gray area and they get grayer and grayer and blacker. And none of this is to excuse any of these serious crimes. It's to say it is possible that for a long time, Epstein didn't really think anything he was doing was that wrong. And what would happen would be that sort of young teenage girls, this is someone who was into 15, 16, 17, 18-year-old girls. This is not someone who is into very young children. This was often people who were looking for their first jobs or getting ready for university or that sort of thing. And Epstein, or Ghislaine Maxwell, daughter of Robert Maxwell, who is a UK newspaper proprietor, very well connected, stole all of his employees' money in a pension fund and then died mysteriously at sea. She was known as Epstein's girlfriend. She is in jail for 20 years for procuring young women for him. But what they would do essentially is attractive young women would say, well, Jeffrey's got this island. He runs a resort for ultra rich people on it. They always need new massage therapists. Do you want to come and train as a masseuse and spend some time on an island? And they'd go out there and they'd get training as a masseuse. They would get all of that. And the massages would be encouraged to escalate. And sometimes that would be a hand job. Sometimes that would be more. Sometimes that would be full sex. There's a recorded incident in one sort of document in which one of the girls actually said, went to him afterwards and said, I didn't consent to that. I wasn't okay with that. And he sort of was very, this is all according to the witness statement, was very gushingly apologetic, act very shocked, sort of paid her $1,000 as a sort of apology, and sort of sorted out all of her airfare home, all of this. And so it's possible that he was deluding himself into thinking this was consent. Now, we know again from court records, a lot of these were very clearly unambiguously rape because they were below the age of consent. A lot of these women were 16 girls were 16 and age of consent was 18. You also had this power dynamic. They were away from everyone they knew. They were on this island, but it has the gray areas of the 80s. Epstein could tell himself that they knew what they were doing when they said yes. Now, of course, they won't have done, but you can see how everyone involved could convince themselves, oh, well, the girls get a bit of patronage. They could tell themselves it wasn't this horrifying thing. And the way these things then work is, as the girls sort of departed, they would often get a reference from him or get put in touch with another possible employer in the future. He helped some get into universities. Like sometimes they would try and do good things for them, but he'd often try and have them recruit other girls or recruit their friends to send them over too. And so if later any of them ever wanted to turn around and think, well, actually, what happened to me was abuse, and I was just one, how many hundreds of people have gone through this abuse? They're complicit as well. They've sent people over. And of course, if you're guilty and not just a victim, and guilty, I should say, is in very heavy quotes there. I'm not putting guilt on these girls. You are less likely to talk. It was a clever part of the MO. And so he essentially had this very well-oiled, slick abuse machine that trafficked women first from around the States and then from around the world, trafficked girls from around the state and around the world to his island and to his parties. And so what happened when his rich friends were there, and when his rich friends went there knowing there would always be young women around, and young women who had perhaps been conditioned by then to expect abuse, to expect to be touched, to expect to have to do things they couldn't consent for, they weren't old enough to consent for, they'd been taken around the world to, and felt trapped. When you think about procuring a girl for a billionaire, you think about it being, someone saying, will you get me a girl? Yes, I will get you a girl. How much will you pay me for the girl? It was all favors for favors. You have a good time at Jeffrey's. And so everything could live in the ambiguity. And so you will have had people at these parties who had no interest in sleeping with the young women, who, were there for whatever other reasons and sort of saw some of this or were aware of some of this, but deliberately didn't ask too many questions, deliberately didn't poke into it too hard, so that they could, and some element of them will have known that they were doing it so they couldn't say anything later, so they couldn't get there. And of course, perhaps if Epstein had never made such powerful friends, had never got so publicly visible, he could have done this for even longer. I should introduce sort of the most famous victim here. It's a woman called Virginia Giuffre. She's also sometimes called Virginia Roberts. She died a couple of months ago, aged 41. And I think it was by suicide. I think it's a good sign of how the scars of this kind of abuse really lasts on you. But this does bring us round to Donald Trump and why he might not want too much of this to come out. Because Virginia Giuffre is why we know a lot of this. She was one of the very first and most prominent victims to come forward. She fought with lawyers for a long time, and she was absolutely ruthlessly attacked by Epstein and by his friends as a liar, as a fantasist, as someone out for revenge, you name it. This woman really had a whole fresh cycle of abuse just for trying to bring this stuff out. she'd had a difficult childhood. She'd run away from home. She'd fallen in with some traffickers before. She'd had some sort of issues. But her dad was a groundskeeper at Mar-a-Lago. And when she was sort of reconnecting with him, when she was sort of trying to get her teenage life in order, she was around Mar-a-Lago. And as she tells it, as is in her witness statements, she then met Ghislaine Maxwell. And so it was on a Trump property that Ghislaine Maxwell introduced Virginia Giuffre to Jeffrey Epstein, who she later accused of having raped her. She also accused Prince Andrew of having abused her. He denies all charges. She also accused, among other people, Alan Dershowitz, who's a very famous and very belligerent US attorney and a very prominent lawyer defending Trump. He very aggressively sued Virginia, and she sort of had various countersuits. They settled, and in the settlement, the statement she offered was that she may have been mistaken when she identified Dershowitz. Now, I think it's interesting, had a very big law settlement, and the statement that they'd settle on was she may have been mistaken. People could read into that what they will, but he has denied all wrongdoing. That was where that case ended up. But this is how this kind of network works. And Virginia sort of left. They tried to keep her around. She fell in love and moved abroad. But she was asked when she moved, I cannot remember where she moved. It was somewhere in East Asia. But she was asked to sort of get a plane ticket to another girl to get her over. And in the end didn't do it. But it meant she had documentation when she eventually sort of brought her cases, showing that she'd been asked to procure young girls for Epstein or for his associates. And so this is part of why she had proof and part of how we know all of this. But it is part of how we know that right through the key bit of this, Donald Trump was there, Mar-a-Lago was involved, and this wasn't a one-off. Trump is up to his neck in this. And I should say, none of this relies on some document that you haven't seen or some file that could come out. This is in court documents that you can read online right now. Like, the big thing that's always bugged me about the Epstein Files is that if there is something called the Epstein Files, it's the accumulation of documents from years and years and years of cases, and from the witness testimony and the documents of people like Virginia Giuffre. And people have ignored all of the stuff that's out there, all of the real stuff, because they imagine there's some extra secret dossier that will prove X, Y, or Z. And that's not usually how these cases work. I mean, we can get onto the new stuff, but I mean, there's, I can get into what happened with Epstein because the prosecutors got him in 2008, but then let him off the hook. And then there's more on how well and closely we know Donald Trump and Epstein knew each other.
So we'll dive into the Donald Trump stuff shortly. I did want to touch on, because this is your particular involvement as well, and also going back to the idea that this wasn't just Jeffrey Epstein committing crimes. He was also trafficking young girls for other people to commit crimes, other people being his rich, powerful, elite friends. So I've seen people describe Epstein as Pizzagate, but real, because the as you said, the conspiratorial idea of girls being trafficked for rich, powerful sex offenders working in a kind of secretive cabal. There are elements of truth to that in Jeffrey Epstein, and again, we've already cleared our throats by saying he denies all charges, but Prince Andrew and his involvement with Virginia Giuffre. And also I wanted to say a dear friend of mine, Josie Ensel, she's works for the Times. She's done a lot of work on Virginia Giuffre recently, so do go check out those stories if you're interested in more about her life. But again, I wanted to go back to Prince Andrew and tell us about your involvement with breaking that story and how that came about.
Yeah, so this was a bit later. So I should say there's a lot of this stuff. You had photos of various people together, etc. It wasn't a secret that Andrew knew Jeffrey Epstein or that they were friends. But what happened to me was I was at a New Year's party up in Haringey in North London in 2014. So it was about half an hour away from becoming 2015, and I got a text from a very grizzled old American source, and it was not, this is not someone I knew to be getting a midnight text from, um, and it basically it gave me a PACER reference number. PACER is the US court document system, and basically said, look this up, get a story out now, move fast. He said, do not under any circumstances call the court clerk. I would say, why? He says the document will get sealed if you do. And so it's possible in cases, even in the US, where you've still got First Amendment, these kind of witness statements, etc., can be kept from the public until a case is concluded or forever. And this happens quite a lot. And it happened a lot with cases like this. And so we sort of suspected, once we dug into it, that this case had been filed on the 31st of December to try and get around them blocking it, so that it was on a weekend, it was on a New Year's. It would take a few days before the document could be taken off the public record so that someone could report it. And the text didn't say much more than that. It didn't tell me what it was about. It didn't tell me any of that. But it was just intriguing enough, right? Like, come on, even if you're a bit drunk at a party, you get a message like that from someone is like sound. You're loading that up on your phone, aren't you, Oz? Oh, you're on mute.
Yeah, 100%. I would absolutely load that up on my. But there's no question about it. So, talk us through the next steps. What did he do?
Yeah. So I load this thing up, and I'm literally sitting under a kitchen counter while people are celebrating New Year's Eve, like reading this thing, trying to work out what it's there for. And it was an anonymous complaint, and it was a civil complaint against Epstein by an anonymous victim. You could quickly work out that it was Virginia Giuffre, and I can say this now because she waived her anonymity in it, obviously. And it named Prince Andrew and said that he was among the people that had abused her. And that allegation hadn't been made before, and he hadn't been named in court before. Now, this was a civil case. He wasn't a party to it. This was also the one that named Dershowitz, who sort of sued over it. But essentially, you did sort of discover the difficulty of doing stories like this, because even then in 2015, this was a story that went back 15, 20 years. It was very complicated. Most people didn't really know who Epstein was. Senior editors were off work. We sort of knew there was a clock on it. This meant trying to work across the 1st of January where no one's there. But is the victim credible? What can you say without it? Have you done enough due diligence that you can do it? Everyone in it is rich. Everyone in it is litigious. Going against the palace in the UK comes at a cost. They have a very aggressive press operation. And so there was essentially, this huge amount of work to kind of go, Prince Andrew is named in this US lawsuit. And even in 2015, there was a bit of a thing of, well, it's a US lawsuit. He's not in it. Is this a story? Does it matter that he's in there? And to my editor's credit, they all said yes. And we got the story out by the 2nd of January. I essentially worked round the clock, as did Paul Lewis, who's the investigations editor of The Guardian now, and a great journalist, great guy, strong recommend people follow his work. He's in the middle of his own nightmare lawsuit at the moment with Noah Clark, who sues The Guardian for libel. And I encourage everyone to support the Guardian's case in that. But we had this slightly odd thing of we got the story out, and the Guardian was almost reluctant even to put the word exclusive on it because it was a tabloid story. It's not the kind of story the Guardian does, and it isn't. We don't really do royals. I haven't worked at the Guardian for 10 years, I should add, but they don't really do royals. They certainly, this was pre-Me Too. They didn't do this sort of sex type story. It's all a bit salacious. It's all a bit sort of tabloid. And so the odd thing was the next day, this story was on the front of newspapers all around the world. It was the splash. And we'd broken it in the Guardian and we put it in the basement, which is that slot at the bottom of a broadsheet front page. So it made the front page and it had a very discreet little exclusive tag. But once it was out in the world, we sort of just then sat back. We didn't try and run with it as our story. We didn't try and claim ownership. We didn't stay on it really. I was in the middle of another very long-running investigation, which is what turned into Swiss leaks and the HSBC bank files. So I will say it's not like I turned off and put my feet up and had a month off. But this is sort of part of what went on with stories like this. You could have these big conspiracies because the stories were very hard to do. And they weren't the kind of journalism that quote-unquote serious newspapers did. And a lot of the other ones were either owned by the kind of people who were named in them or who didn't want to pick fights with people that rich and that powerful. And so they didn't have to do very much to hide or to keep it secret. And part of it as well was that there was this strange state that Jeffrey Epstein lived in from 2008 until his death in 2019, where you could kind of go, well, is it a story that Jeffrey Epstein's a sex criminal or a sex trafficker? We know he is. And what had happened, and this is one of the mysteries that I think we would like better answers on, is in 2008, a lot of this had caught up with him. And it is an offense to move a minor across state lines to rape them. And that fact of moving people across state lines means it's quite easy to demonstrate offences. And because it's statutory rape, if you can prove sex happened or a sexual act happened and that the person travelled, that case is there. That's a lot easier than other crimes of this to prosecute. I should say it isn't easy. Even then, how do you prove that a sexual act happened? How do you sort of get past that with all the waves of lawyers, all the waves of investigators, all of the other thing? This is not actually to belittle the effort of the people who really worked on this.
Well, listen, take us to 2008 and his first dalliance with the law. How did that come about? How did he get reported to the authorities? Did the authorities suspect him for doing this? And as you said, it's that crucial thing of taking a minor across a state line, which is a much easier to prove offense than other things related to this kind of horrible stuff. I should have really given a trigger warning at the start, but with the Epstein Files in the name, I think people should pretty much realize that we're going to be talking about sensitive subject matter. So apologies to anyone who wasn't expecting this kind of level of stuff. But this is an important story for reasons that we'll get into, particularly that it has a political impact and it's having ramifications now in the United States. But let's still get into the history before we try and finish the rest of the episode on Trump. 2008. What happened there, and how did we move from 2008 to the next time he was eventually caught up by authorities?
So essentially, the prosecutors were building the case in the way we said. Like, if you've got enough victims, eventually some of them talk. And some of them told people who said they should get it to authorities. And eventually some authorities started taking it seriously. And he was arrested, and there was a very, very strong case that was being built against him. I think there was something like 19 counts, something more than that. I've lost the page where I've got notes on this, I'm afraid. But this is where it was a bit strange. It looked like there was a fairly solid case that could have got him away for 20 or 30 years. Now, we know the American justice system is very, very good at letting rich people cut deals that help them virtually get away with murder. But the one Epstein cut was so weirdly good, it's ridiculous. And essentially, it meant he pled guilty to one quite minor charge in comparison to some of the things he could have been charged with, of getting a minor across state lines for sexual purposes. One charge, and he would do essentially day release prison where he could still work sort of almost house arrest, basically, for a fairly short period of time. He would go on the registers, but he wouldn't do prison, and he would have immunity from federal or state prosecution for any of this conduct because of the plea deal. And this plea deal was actually signed off by the court. And so he was convicted, but his punishment was so incredibly minor that he could sort of carry on associating. So he was publicly discredited. His name was out there. Anyone who associated with him after 2000.
We've lost him there. Hang on. He'll come back. There he is.
A disconnect.
Yeah, we disconnected. If it happens again, just do that. You're back on now. So yeah, we lost you mid-sentence there. So,
well, who wanted that to? Who was trying to cover up there then? Yes, he got this suspiciously good deal. He was convicted. Anyone who associated with him and continued to associate with him after 2008 was was associated with a convicted sex trafficker, but he was still out and free. After a fairly short amount of time, he still had most of his fortune. He was still out in the world. He was still operating. And then after that, a lot of people were more distant with him. Bill Gates is one of the funny ones here. Bill Gates still flew to the island after the conviction. He was quite a close friend of Epstein. He's not exactly a Trump guy. Now, again, he says Epstein gave him really good marital advice. And I should say part of this is Epstein was incredibly good at toadying to rich people. He would buy their kids pianos. He was quite good at supporting, getting extra help or getting good therapists for disabled kids. If their parents were rich, he could schmooze them in all sorts of different ways. And so which ones had he just schmoozed effectively without this, and which ones were in it for the girls, would have been a great matter for prosecutors to look into. And, perhaps in these cases they have.
Well, tell us a bit about Bill Clinton as well. What's Bill Clinton's involvement with all of this?
Well, he's been to the island. He's flown with him. He was in the contact book. He was one of the ones who seems to have disassociated at the point of the arrest. Bill Clinton, of course, has had allegations of rape and sexual assault against him personally, from dating back quite a long time. So this wouldn't necessarily be a shock. The truth would be that there are fewer obvious associations between Clinton and Epstein as Trump and Epstein, but they are in there. The best document that exists is there is a phone contact book of Jeffrey Epstein, but it is a phone contact book. It means that he had this person's number and name. It doesn't mean much more than that.
Is that the Epstein Files? Because that's what I think. When people say release the files, they want to see the list of numbers and names that. Don't we have part of this list already public? By the way, isn't it already in court documents?
Yeah, it's in court documents. You can look up Epstein's phone book right now. I mean, and yes, Donald Trump's in it. Melania's in it. So Jeffrey Epstein says that he introduced Donald and Melania to one another. He actually goes a bit further. He says that the first time Donald and Melania slept with each other was on his plane. Epstein had a 727, which he calls I can't remember if he called or his friends called the Lolita Express. But Epstein said,
gross.
In tapes that he recorded shortly before his death, he said that he said that Donald Trump was for 10 years his closest friend on the planet. And he said that he not only introduced Donald and Melania, but that they first slept together on his private jet. Now, that's not some secondhand Wall Street Journal thing. This is
as Epstein himself, right? Now, okay, wait. So hang on. Let's.
Do you regard Epstein as trustworthy in every way? Of course I don't. He's a fucking sex trafficker.
Okay, but wait. We need to get between 2008 to the next conviction before we start talking about. We'll do the whole rest of it on Trump, but let's get to the ring finally. Oh, we've lost you again. You'll come back. We want to get to the bit where he's convicted and he goes to prison the second time. I'm sure James will be along shortly. Bear with me. This is live, guys. This is how it works. I am just WhatsApping him. There we go. Anyway, so maybe the powers that be. Here he is.
Back. Sorry,
it's
I don't
right.
know what's going on.
I was just saying we want to go back between the 2008 and 2000 and whenever he was eventually arrested, gets to prison, kills himself. We want to fit out the rest of that history, and then we'll go back in time and we'll start talking about the Trump connections and the Epstein Files and how they relate to what's going on today. But there is so much that I don't understand. You said he's out and about, he's just living his normal life, he's still got his rich and powerful friends, and everyone's kind of thinking, oh, you were done for sex trafficking, but you got a slap on the wrist kind of thing.
Most of his rich friends abandoned him. A few sort of stuck around, but if they stayed associated, they were very quiet. I should say to the person in the comments who's saying the files are everything, it's each finding from each investigation. Yes, that's kind of what people... I mean, that's what I would call the Epstein Files. There have been dozens of civil cases, there have been various criminal cases, and when you look at what we already have, there is a lot of incriminating stuff there, but it's not. There isn't some secret document that is here is everyone and every girl they slept with and whatever, because that isn't how life works. We'll come to this, but the bit to fill in really, this 2008 to 2019 bit is most significant because this is actually where the victims fought back. Because this 2008 settlement was outrageous. This was one tap on the wrist and for full immunity and for him to carry on living an ultra rich, like playboy lifestyle. This is what he could do thanks to, he got a get out of jail free card. And I can see why people look at it and go, well, how did he get this? Was this... And the world is...
Was there a quid pro quo?
Enough. Yeah, the world is sick and twisted enough that it could just be, oh, well, Jeffrey's not that bad. They're coming for him. He's our friend. I could see it being that venal, that banal, that sort of awful. But you look at a deal that good and you've got questions. And the victims had questions. And so between this time, they tried to get justice in other ways. And they tried to get more information out in other ways. And that included suing Epstein. And people always try and talk smack about sort of sexual rape and sexual assault victims who sue for money. Well, why do they want money? And it's, well, they tried to get justice. They got denied. And this is a way they can get a day in court. This is a way they can get more documents out. This is a way they can get some form of making people pay. If that's what you can do, if that's a way you want to do it, credit to you. And lots of the documents that we have, lots of the files that we have came out because of these cases. But also, as someone said in the comments, it can help you pay for therapy. It can help you try and rebuild your life. But part of what they tried to do with these various cases, because some of them were against bits of the state, was trying to overturn this broad immunity that came from the 2008 case. And that was eventually successful. And so by the time they were looking at Epstein again in 2019, it was because they could. Some of the victims, and I think Virginia was still involved in this case, they actually managed to get this deal thrown out, or in part thrown out. It was upheld in some parts, but essentially to go, no, the immunity it granted was too broad. if prosecutors can find new evidence and new cases, they can bring them. And because the number of victims was believed to be so huge with Epstein, it was there. Now, he then, obviously, he was a very high profile flight risk. They also, this was post Me Too. It was a different era. People didn't want to look like they were letting him off the hook a second time. So he didn't get bail. And I think rightly not. I don't think we should look at that as a strange decision. There was a very, very long time where where Jeffrey Epstein could have been silenced very easily. There are a lot of times in that 11 years where he could have been killed or he could have been sort of put out there. He was showing very little inclination of talking. There was no sign he was about to change his mind. There was very little sign that he knew anything that could have done him that good anyway. I still tend to believe that he killed himself in 2019. I would have told you until fairly recently that I didn't think there was anything unpublished that would be much worse than what we already know. All of these people fought these court cases at every stage. They fought against the victims. They pushed against every disclosure. They denied every disclosure. They used every tool in a rich person's arsenal to stop it coming out. There's a really interesting.
Well, how did that net finally close around him? But he was finally in prison after all of that. So how did we get there?
Well, that's what I was saying about the immunity got overturned. So there was enough of it that you could go for it, and so he was back in for old offences,
and he was awaiting trial at that point, yes. Right?
Now, this is what sort of has thrown me a bit. Is on some level, if Donald Trump is still mentally coherent and mentally sort of sane, he must know that there's a huge amount of public documentation of his association already. The fact that his name's got to come up in stuff shouldn't be a shock because it's done it many, many times. There are photos where they very clearly look like very good friends hanging out together. They are there. There are many of them. And so I'd always assumed that this was a very clever trick he was pulling. When his supporters said, Donald Trump will release the Epstein Files. And I've had this conversation with Trump supporters when they went, he's got to uncover the paedophilia. He's got to uncover the sex trafficking. And I go, well, Trump knew Epstein better than anyone. And they go, yeah, but why would he promise to release the Epstein Files if there was anything bad on him in them? They go, well, he's talks about Epstein liking them young. He and Melania are pictured with Ghislaine and this.
That weird thing he said, he was like, I wish Ghislaine well. Like, do you know what I mean? Yeah. That was such a weird thing to say, completely unprompted.
Virginia Giuffre met Ghislaine Maxwell at Mar-a-Lago. Trump is in this. But what happened was people would say, well, look, Trump said that the Epstein Files exist and he'll put them out. If there was anything bad, if any of this was bad, that would be in there. So some of them would say, well, maybe he was doing this to catch them. Maybe, that's the very conspiracy theory version. But with other people, they'd say, look, clearly he didn't do anything wrong because he's promised to release this. Now, my line was always that the Epstein Files were the things we had that have been published, were the things that were out there, were the things that these lawyers and these women and, these victims fought to get out, these documents time and time again, painstakingly in each of these cases, being called a liar each time they did a lawsuit, being called money grabbing, being called, you name it, being sued themselves, having their sort of sanity destroyed with it. These documents, these files, these court documents came out over 10 years, 15 years, 20 years at the cost, a great psychological and human cost. And no one looked at them, really. No one thought about them because they thought there was this secret document. But then the way Trump has responded in the last few weeks makes me think, well, what do we know exists that we don't have? And what we know exists that we haven't seen is the prosecutor's records from the 2019 investigation. Now, it isn't unusual that we haven't seen these. You don't usually see a prosecutor's file unless they fight in court, and then you only see the bits that they use. Now, there's stuff in there that shouldn't be out. There will be names of victims who were children who shouldn't be named unless they wish to be. There'll be testimony that shouldn't be there. I mean, some of these witness statements, etc., would be so like they're graphic.
What would Julian Assange do in this instance?
I mean, we know what Julian Assange would do in this instance, but this stuff wouldn't usually be released. But if you're promising to release files, the thing that definitely, I don't think there is a secret black book of who did what when. But
that sounds like something someone was in the black book would say, James. Which comes on to Trump, really. I mean, this is what we're talking about, right?
But there's this 2019 file. Now, this 2019 file was about locking Epstein up. It's not about locking up anyone else, really. So don't expect this to be some mother trove or anything. But this was what they were pulling together when they were trying to do the best possible case against Jeffrey Epstein, who they knew would have the best lawyers available to him, the best arguments, the best everything. So they will have been trying to get the most copper bottom, bulletproof, brilliant case together. So I don't think it would be as lurid as some people expect. But if there are new government documents, if there are secret Epstein files we haven't seen, it's this 2019 prosecution stuff. And the force to get that out, the effort to get this from coming out is so telling, is so odd, is so suddenly aggressive. Suddenly you've got Obama treason, you've got the Washington sort of sports teams renaming is back in. I think at one point Trump tried to claim he'd got Coca-Cola in the US to use real sugar again. Like, he has never flailed more publicly and more desperately. The Epstein files turned into something that the Democrats had faked. Obama wrote the Epstein files, and yet it was apparently the Democrats that were in them.
But this is something that's particular to Donald Trump's base, right? They were obsessed and have been obsessed with the Epstein files for a long time. Part of that public surge of support for Trump from kind of the non-voting crowd of people, you would say, are, people involved in QAnon, people who think there's a giant conspiracy of elites, and that, it plays into this populist narrative that Donald Trump, despite being an elite person, is a crusader against this elite, crime ring, basically.
Yeah, his supporters really care about this. And look, if you are a Trump supporter, if you are someone who usually doesn't vote and you care about Epstein, you have hundreds of victims, hundreds of trafficked girls, and Democrats and other politicians aren't talking about it, or they're saying nothing to see here, or it's already out. That makes them sound indifferent. That makes them sound like they don't care at best. It makes it sound like they're complicit at worst. And so Trump was saying, I care, I'll put it out. I'll put the JFK stuff out. I'll put, all of this I'll put Area 51. I'll put the aliens out there. He could frame as being on their side, but it did mean Epstein not only was not a threat to him as an issue, he was on their side. And a lot of the people around Trump really campaigned on stuff like this. Kash Patel talked about it. Dan Bongino talked about it. Donald Trump Jr. said, if you imagine being in government and not just releasing the Epstein files on day one. Laura Loomer, who seems to now run the deep state, she's got no government role. She rose to prominence as a QAnon influencer, and she has now had the head of the NSA, the deputy head of the NSA, and about 8 other senior intelligence officers fired. All of these people rose up and rose crowds off the back of the anger of Epstein. Epstein was what you could point at as the real story. If anyone said QAnon was too ridiculous, if someone said the Clinton files were too ridiculous, you would point to
Pizzagate.
And you would say, you would go, well, look, Epstein's there. We're not getting the truth on that. No one except Trump's offering us the truth on that. We should have this sort of coming out. We should be able to talk about this. And look, I get I'm angry about this. So it is sick. It is wrong. But I do think the way that people used conspiracy theories on this was very cynical, because you had the real documents, you had the real stuff. And I don't, if your search for answers is that there's a secret file that reveals it all somewhere that isn't being released, you don't look for them yourself. And someone in the comments said, it's weird to have 1,000 victims and no clients. Now, my understanding of this is that it always worked a bit more complicated than that. Like, people would be over on Epstein Island, girls would be there, people would go there knowing girls would be there. There wouldn't be a direct transaction. Epstein wouldn't ask for anything directly in return, but it would mean when he next asked a favor, or when they next needed to invest some money, or when he was phoning up for something, they knew, this stuff can work in this very unspoken way. Always think, how can people move this to the gray area? How could they rationalize this grotesque crime to themselves? And so I don't think there's something as clear as a client list. I do think, we know that other people we know some people who've been named by victims as, they made me sleep with them, they made me do things. And of course, we know they denied them, etc. There are ways that we could pull it together. And getting to it would be trying to say, here's a special prosecution unit. If you were a victim, come forward to this. We will try and cross-reference victim testimony. We will try and cross-reference flight records. We will do a whole public investigation, and we will look into other people who were there, other people who were involved in the crime. And as to answer the question in the stream, it's not only a crime if there's a record. There are ways you could go for the other clients, or the other potential offenders, the people who benefited from Epstein's trafficking. That don't need there to be a secret file, that don't need there to be a secret dossier, that don't need it to have worked like a classic conspiracy theory. And so there are ways you could get these people, but turning it into this kind of conspiracy theory that Trump could weaponize has not just helped Trump get away with it, it's helped almost disguise the real story. As you say, no one really knows what the Epstein documents are. And it's like, well, actually, it's all of these court cases, it's all of these documents. They've been with you for decades. And some of them are quite chilling. The one I always point people to that isn't just completely grim is there's a document prepared by Ghislaine for Epstein's staff on how each room should be prepared at the villa. And it's, these 3 newspapers should be there. This phone should be there. Here's how you should talk to him. Here's what drinks should be in which fridge. Here's how the bar should be stocked. Here's how... And there's something very Lives of the Ultra Rich about it. But there's also, you look at the level at which Ghislaine was organizing Epstein's life. You look at the level of precision and detail involved. And then you think about what we know about what else Epstein was up to, and what level of detail she must have known and been across about the stuff that they weren't writing down. And I recommend tracking that document down. But these sorts of things, it is usually you see a document like that, or you see the phone list, or everyone talks about the flight logs like they're secret. They're public. You can get them. They're up. To the point where earlier in the administration, they did try the very silly stunt where they invited a bunch of influencers up and gave them these big ring binders, these dossiers of Epstein files. And it was all stuff that you could have Googled. And look, you can't be in the White House.
That was trailed as part 1, right? It was trailed as part 1, with the part 2 being the unreleased stuff.
But why would you ever give someone a dossier of something they could have Googled? Like, this showed you that these people were phony, that this was BS right at the start, that they are playing a very sick political game with this very real case.
So look, let's bring it right up to the present day. We've had the Wall Street Journal do some recent stories on this. We've had Trump threaten to sue or even initiate a lawsuit, I believe.
He has actually launched a lawsuit.
He launched a lawsuit. And so, again, as you said, Trump is up to his neck in the Epstein files. We know this from the files that we've already seen in the court document cases. You know, we know that he's in these files. If we assume the files include things that we've already seen, the question is, how implicated is he in stuff that we maybe haven't seen? And again, I don't think many people were particularly believing the idea that there was some kind of conspiracy that Trump was involved somehow, and that if the files were released, that would prove that. But Trump's behavior since then has made not just, normally skeptical people believe that, but his own base now are looking at him and thinking, well, why is he acting so He's acting so shifty that people who are the most obsequious, servile supporters of this man are questioning his integrity. The integrity of, an adjudicated rapist, we shall say, who, look, if anyone saw photos of you and I hanging around, they would know that we were friends because we look like friends in the photos. That's exactly how Donald Trump, and they're like arm over each other, like familiar, it's not like meeting someone at a party, like, I meet Michael Gove or something and shake his hand. It's not like I'm in the same room as someone and I've shook their hand. These are people that know each other quite well. They know each other on a personal basis. So is Trump more implicated here? Is that why he's acting so shifty?
Yeah, I mean, look, there's pictures of me and you at a music festival, like draped over each other, and we still look less friendly than Trump and Epstein did in a photo with Ghislaine and Melania. Like, these people were close; they were good friends. And Trump himself said in quotes, Epstein likes women maybe even as much as Donald does, but he likes them very much on the young side. That's not Wall Street Journal fake news. Trump said that. As you say, a court has found on the balance of probabilities that Donald Trump is a rapist, committed serious sexual assault. It wasn't quite that, but on the balance of probabilities in a civil case, he's been found to do that. There is a video. Yes, the cat has now had enough of this. She's heard enough. She's not voting Trump next time. You have Trump said that when you're rich enough, you can have any girl you want. You can grab them. You can grab them by the pussy. That is the Access Hollywood tape, the famous one that came out in the 2016 campaign. By embracing the conspiracy, Trump has managed to get a lot of his supporters to essentially believe him instead of their lying eyes. He's been able to sort of have them not look at the photos, not look at, Trump's old association with Roy Cohn, who is a very dodgy New York fixer. And then with Epstein, people would look at it and go, well, it's there. Now, innocent until proven guilty. We've said throughout, some billionaires will have just hung out with Epstein because he was a toady in other ways. But Trump had a huge interest in young women. He promoted a lot of things. He ran Miss Universe. We know that Trump had parties. There's reports of one party that was just Trump, Epstein, and a load of young women. We know the history of his character. We know what courts have said about his conduct with women. We know things like him paying off Stormy Daniels. Do we think that Trump was Epstein's closest friend, that he associated with him all this time, that he flew on the island, that he was potentially introduced to his wife by Epstein, but that's the only time he ever sort of engaged in anything? That's sort of the story that the blameless Trump narrative needs you to believe. And Trump sort of needed this conspiracy narrative to work somehow for him to be able to turn around and say it would be something else. Now, I don't think new documents would suddenly have something in it much worse than we already know, because the facts we already know are terrible. maybe there is someone in there who just directly said it was Donald Trump and Jeffrey Epstein, both of them, or something like that. I'm speculating, and of course, I'm sure he would very angrily deny that. But by suddenly panicking as much as he had, by flailing as much as he had, people are now looking at what's out there, and they can't come up with a story that looks good for Trump anymore. Or some of them can't. Some of the influencers, some of them have just decided to change overnight. I think anyone, by the way, who has spent the last 2 years, 3 years, 5 years talking about the Epstein Files, who now says not to look at them, write their names down, get their clips, and do not listen to them on anything else. However much if you are fully MAGA, that is your right. I don't understand you, but that is your right. But if you're fully MAGA and sort of thought Trump would got to release this, and you're still angry about that, that is your right. You good on you. You wanted that. You cared about that. You still care about that. If you had a kind of grifter who spent years building up an influencer base, caring about Epstein and saying what was out there, and then you're turning around now and saying, well, this was never important. Democrats want you to care about this. X wants you to care about this. I am a lefty liberal. If there is something in there saying that Democrats partied with Epstein and then raped women, I want those Democrats to go to jail. I have no, whoever is in there. If Bill Clinton goes to jail,
put them all in jail. We're totally fine. Send all of the Democrats to jail.
I have no issue with that. This is not anything partisan, and I don't think most people do. I think people want anyone involved in this to have the consequences. So if someone has said all along that they're not going to push on the Epstein issue because for whatever reason, that's something. I don't really get that either, to be honest. But some people don't follow this kind of story. Some people, there's only so many things you can look at. There's only
I don't follow this kind of story, and again, these are things that talk about subjects like Trump that I'm interested in. But it's just, again, it's so awful that I just, I deal with enough awful things in my life that I don't tend to want to deal with these kinds of stories and read about them and learn about all the, true crime stuff. It really doesn't appeal to me. So this is even though I'm someone who knows about political issues like this, I would still count myself as someone who doesn't, engage with this kind of stuff.
It's a very complicated story as well, but essentially, anyone who has said for the last sort of 2-3 years, release the Epstein Files, why aren't the Democrats doing it? This is a cover up, we will, who is now just turned on a dime and is saying, no, those people's names deserve to be down there and they should never be listened to on anything ever again. Fuck those people. Really sincerely and deeply fuck those people. Not quite as much as the people involved in the actual sex crimes, but if you are that much of an empty partisan hack, screw you. No one deserves to listen to you. And it's not because of your politics. It's not because you support Trump. The people who are sticking to what they thought on this, to their convictions, credit to them. I don't agree with them on anything else, but on this, credit to them. The people who swapped overnight because Trump started panicking, screw them.
Well, look, you got some supporters in the chat who are cheering on your swearing. They're big fans of that. I like this informal, loose James. You should Twitch stream more often. So look, we're coming towards the end. I don't think we're quite at the end yet. I just want to say, wow, incredible response tonight. We've got more than 6,200 people watching live as we speak right now. So a big explosion compared to how many people I've had just on Twitch alone. So that shows the power of moving it onto Twitter. People are just much more easy to click one button than click to another website. But thank you all for joining us. And if you enjoy the show, please do consider following along, liking, subscribing. And if you're a long-time supporter through the Patreon or Ko-fi, really, really appreciate that. Look, James, I want to talk about these Wall Street Journal articles and what's it triggered Trump's wrath. What has the reporting been? And is this Rupert Murdoch finally getting his long planned revenge on, it's been public knowledge that Murdoch doesn't like Trump despite, running a Trump friendly kind of network. Effectively, it's not effectively. It's a Fox is a pro-Trump network. So that's been rumbling in the background for a while. Is this Murdoch doing this, or is this just good Wall Street Journal journalism? Is it a bit of both? Why the sudden interest now?
There's some interesting Kremlinology in this. I can't drop links in the chat because I can't remember my Twitch account login, but I just wrote a piece in the Eye about Trump and Murdoch and this a couple of days ago. Well,
I'll stick it in the show notes afterwards, guys, so you'll be able to read it.
But basically, Emma Tucker used to edit the Sunday Times, British journalist, is now the editor of the Wall Street Journal, and she's a badass, to be fair. Like, she's an editor that's very steely and that will stick with her story. And they did some very good reporting. I mean, I should say, what they reported in the Wall Street Journal is that Trump wrote a sort of very creepy, enigmatic little poem, sort of talking about a shared secrets between him and Epstein, and talking about how it's funny how enigmas never age. And then it's apparently in the shape of a woman, and then Trump's signature on the birthday message is where her pubic hair would be. And what's interesting is a lot of people coming out and denying this on behalf of Trump have said, well, I've never seen Trump doodle. Trump never even draws anything. And Trump famously doodles. Trump draws stuff. He has sold drawings as part of a bit. And other people go, well, does that sound like him? Trump has said, does that sound like me? Yes, it absolutely sounds like you. It 100% sounds like you. But I think the reporting...
Who, me? Renowned sleazebag, Donald Trump.
Yeah, it 100%, buddy. That sounds like you. But I think it's good reporting. I think it's out there. But, is that a bigger deal than Epstein introducing Trump and Melania? Is that a bigger deal than the photos? Is that a bigger deal? It's new, so it helps, but it's not like any part of the case relies on this new Wall Street Journal reporting. But what was also interesting was Trump made it really obvious he was trying to kill the story. He talked about trying to get Emma Tucker to kill it. He talked about going directly to Murdoch to try and get him to kill it. Now, it might be that Murdoch just doesn't interfere with the Wall Street Journal because its valuation relies on that or something. But I think more of it is Murdoch has never liked Trump. He sort of puts up with him. And so Fox isn't going for Trump on this much yet. Fox is largely not talking about this. Fox is desperate for the news agenda to move on so that it doesn't have to pick a side. So this isn't war yet.
Well, the question is, why isn't the news agenda moving on? Because it's not moving on. In fact, it's just more Trump, more Epstein. It's all anyone's talking about at the moment. Obviously, there are other global issues, but in America, this is really tearing Trump's base apart. We've seen major reported disputes between Pam Bondi, who is I believe she's the Attorney General, and Dan Bongino, who is the second in command at the FBI. Yeah. Apparently, he just didn't go to work one day, and I would love to have a job where you can just decide not to go into work one day. I mean, we should all be so lucky, right? Talk to me about, why the news agenda won't go away, why Cersei's bottom won't go away, and why what's going on within Trump's base, and why people are at each other's throats over it.
Well, essentially, a whole bunch of these people thought this existed. Like, this is not just a whole bunch of very clever, cynical people like Steve Bannon.
They staked their reputations on this, right? This was their thing, right? They built platforms on it.
I think a bunch of them thought it existed. I think a bunch of them are the kind of mad, dumb sort of people who got in this world. I think they believed their own bullshit.
All right, we've lost James momentarily. I'm sure he'll be back. I'm pretty sure that was a cat involved. The cat logged you off, right? That was.
She genuinely did. She actually left the window.
Cersei's like, I've had enough for Epstein, but we haven't. We want more. So carry on. Sorry.
That was God. Yeah. Okay. So
clip that up, guys. Clip it up. Right.
my cat's working for the fucking deep state.
Oh god.
What? Where was? Oh god.
Pam Bondi, Dan Bongino not turning up to work. Go on.
So some of these people believed it. Like some of them, Steve Bannon, when he taps into this stuff, sort of believes there's elites and they're conspiring against, etc. But he's using these issues cynically. He's tapping into it. Some of these people, like Dan Bongino, I think actually believed it, but were actually in it, and so they're a bit confused and conflicted. They don't really know what to do with it. But critically, this isn't really it. No one cares that people like me or you are angry about this story or that the Wall Street Journal reports on it. It's fascinating how much the New York Times and Washington Post seem to want the news story to move on.
They're just like, come on, guys, let's move
don't
on.
like the story. There was a completely insane take, I think, in the New York Times at the weekend that was saying Trump's come out unscathed and even ahead of Epstein. He's polling at minus 37 on this issue. And this is an issue his base care about. Like,
I think it's interesting when the New York Times would rather talk about Gaza than Epstein. It's like that says something, right?
But yeah, like the liberal media who supposedly hate Trump and would kill him just to watch him die are sort of going, oh no, let's move on, let's do it. And this is sticking because his base care. And like they are sort of the only people that matter. The liberal media cannot sort of shoot straight, cannot get its act together at all. The Democrats cannot drive a news agenda, although to be fair to them, they haven't screwed this one entirely. Like they haven't just sort of gone very snooty and too high. They have held some votes to try and release it. I mean, you have the insane position where the House is now not sitting till September so that no one can make Republicans vote on whether to release the Epstein Files.
So talk us through that. I mean, again, this must be mental to people. Like, why not just release the files? And again, this is Mike Johnson. This is a diehard MAGA. I mean, mind you, he's not part of the fringe Marjorie Taylor Greene. They don't like Mike Johnson, but what's going on? Why is this vote being they recessing until September to avoid a vote on this?
Well, because they can't say yes and they can't say no. If you vote to release them, you're voting to do on something Donald Trump doesn't want you to do, which is death. If you vote to hide them, you are going to hear about that forever from the MAGA base, and you will get primaried by another MAGA Republican who will say he voted to hide the Epstein files. Like, it is an absolute no-win vote. And so they are just going to keep ignoring this and hoping it goes away. And really, it's not up to us. It's not even up to the mainstream media whether it goes away or not. It is actually up to the MAGA voters. And they're kind of winning. Like, they've got the only concessions so far. I mean, absolutely insanely, you have the very bizarre situation of not just career prosecutors saying that they'll go and talk to Ghislaine Maxwell, but the Deputy Attorney General, who is very much a Trump appointee, who is very much in MAGA world, who is a political appointee who would usually go nowhere near a criminal case, is saying he personally will go and visit Ghislaine Maxwell. Now, they clearly feel like they need to get something out of it.
Well, is there rumors of a pardon coming? I mean, if that happens, surely there's going to be a total breakdown of this MAGA coalition, right?
Well, the clever thing to do would be to say, can you get her to do something like only name a few people liberals like, try and sort of do that, name no one else, and then get a pardon in exchange for that. And so sort of go, look, well, we got the truth, we released it, and we've got these people, there's these cases now. They need to find something that they can say are the Epstein files and release them. But their tricky thing now is there needs to be some convincing reason why they didn't release them earlier and why what they've got is enough. And the question is whether they've broken the trust temporarily and get it back, or they've broken the trust forever on this. And so is there anything they can release that the base will believe is it? is the file, is enough that they do it. But this feels to me like it's got to stick. This feels to me like something's changed. And, as a Brit who cares about this story, I've followed it. I didn't follow it until I was kind of made to cover it. Once I got that text in 2014, New Year's Eve, if I ignored the story, if I had my New Year's, that story probably, as I was told, the document would probably have got sealed and the story would have stayed out there. I didn't chase this because I knew a lot about it or I cared about it. I chased it back then because I felt like, well, if I don't do it now, it might not come out, and it should come out. And so I understand people kind of going, this isn't the sort of story I do. This isn't the kind of journalism I do. This isn't what I follow. But it's an issue that matters. And it's an issue that matters to Trump's base. And how come when the New York Times or when other people say, we've got to listen to what the MAGA base care about, they're only doing that when they say racist things, and they're not doing that when they say we want to hear more about the Epstein scandal? Like, look, if you think you need to speak to those people, speak to them on this, and don't just kind of wait for Trump to get away with it again. Because if this is something that makes people connect and see Donald Trump for what he is instead of what they want him to be, then this is serious politics as well. And even if it isn't, even if it does nothing politically, if this is a chance to get some form of justice for the victims who were denied it when Epstein killed himself or died in his cell in 2019, if this is a chance to do that, well, isn't that enough in its own right? Shouldn't that be enough in its own right?
Well, listen, I will say if the New York Times or Washington Post, and I know plenty of journalists there, but I doubt I know any of the senior editors. If you're wondering whether people are interested in this story or not, I know people are interested in this story or not. We've got about 7,000 concurrent viewers at the moment live watching this, which is the first time I've ever put a show on Twitter. I wasn't expecting 7,000 people to be watching along live at me and James's cat's bottom. But the interest in this story is absolutely real. People are angry. People are frustrated. And this isn't going away anytime soon. As you said, Trump needs to pull away a win from this. So what options does he have available to him?
I think their best case scenario is concocting something with Ghislaine to try and get some release that names.
But that could backfire spectacularly.
It could absolutely backfire spectacularly, but, play stupid games, win stupid prizes. Trump has raised the stakes and raised the stakes and raised the stakes on the scandal in which, after Epstein and Prince Andrew, he is probably the most intimately, involved and throughout it. And so that's where he's got it. He either just bites the bullet and releases absolutely loads of stuff and then leaves people to wade through it and moves on. He just tries to brazen it out and hopes that they don't care. He's not got that many good options. But I think everything else hasn't mattered. Even things that his base might seem that they cared about. This is the first scandal that's actually come from his base. This isn't coming from liberal media. This isn't an issue that has been pushed from that. Liberal media cares about January the 6th. Liberal media cared about the financial trials. They cared about the other ones. This one is his base on him. That's new. And I think that's a phenomenon that people should pay attention to and scrutinize. But yeah, I think they will try some sort of dodgy deal with Ghislaine Maxwell. I think people should be looking at that very closely right now.
I just got to say, isn't it Ghislaine? Is it? I'm sure it's Ghislaine, not Ghislaine. But
so I've heard Ghislaine, I've heard Ghislaine, I've heard Ghislaine. Your friend and mine, John Sweeney, says Ghislaine.
Okay, all right. Well, if John Sweeney says it, then
Ghislaine is there. there's also Virginia Giuffre. I'm pronouncing it Giuffre because that's how Americans pronounce it. It's an Italian surname. Italians pronounce it with a different emphasis. It's one of these. Who knows?
So, look, I have a question, and we'll throw over to audience now because James has been talking for an hour and a half, which is very impressive.
I was going to say I have to go eat dinner soon.
Okay, right. We're coming to the end now, so we'll throw open to audience questions. But I know if you're following along on Twitter, you haven't heard of me before. This might be a question that interests you. But again, if you're a new audience, if you're just seeing us for the first time, please do like and follow and subscribe, and you'll get more shows like this coming to you weekly, 3 times a week. But James, the question I have to you, particularly concerning this video camera stuff and the edited footage that we, again, I don't know too much about this, but you'll tell me, did Jeffrey Epstein kill himself, and what's going on with the footage? Now, I believe he killed himself. I have no reason to doubt that. Neither does Dan Bongino for what it's worth, if you think his opinion matters on anything. But talk to us about the conspiracies there. And again, if you got some final questions, please throw them in, and James will have hopefully answer them before he gets his dinner.
Yeah, so I think he killed himself. I totally understand why other people think otherwise. Like, it looks bad. His cell partner was moved. His suicide watch was downgraded. Someone who should have been watching him on the night watch wasn't watching him properly on shift. It's just that is very, very, very routine for that prison in New York. Like, even for very high priority detainees, this tells you a lot about the prison system in America. Epstein had never shown any signs he was about to turn. There was nothing in recent days to say that was different. He might not even directly know enough to sort of get anything either. If he's just inviting people to parties and leaving them to do what they will with women, he gets the girls to the parties, he conditions and abuses them himself and breaks them in. He's got the infrastructure around him. He might not personally know who does what, but critically, there would have been a lot of opportunities to get rid of him a lot earlier and with a lot more scrutiny, a lot less scrutiny. And we have quite a lot of CCTV. We have quite a lot of other records that suggest he's there. Now, on a similar thing, there must be one Russian oligarch who actually fell off their balcony because they were drunk. But no one's going to believe that.
I'm going to doubt that none of them. That's my contention.
Well, just having seen how drunk some of them get, Now, the footage thing does look very suspicious. Now, this is because there was cell footage released that we were told was raw footage. And raw footage, you can tell, anyone who's done basic editing, you can tell that it's done that. And that's not actually what the cameras output. They output a slightly edited thing, and they do a daily reset. And for that time, there is, I think, about a 100-second break. And that daily reset does happen on the Epstein thing. Now, they said this was raw footage. Actual genuine raw footage wouldn't have shown the break in the way that it did. Now, this is a file format thing and a daily reset thing. And there is other people's reporting has confirmed there is a daily reset at that time. That was when it was. It was the right length. But this stuff always looks odd. I mean, there was a whole elaborate thing. When we were doing the Snowden files, the PRISM program was one of the biggest ones we did. And Washington Post had their version of the story, and The Guardian had their own version of the story. And they both came out. They came out the same day. I would say The Guardian never amended it. The Washington Post may have had to correct theirs. But there's a huge thing on conspiratorial corners of the internet because our slides looked different from the Washington Post ones, and people read huge amounts into them, and all sorts of stuff going on. And we had this policy where we weren't talking about anything we used to access them or look at them, because we knew we had like half the intelligence agencies in the world looking at us. And so we were using really, really air-gapped Linux computers that only had OpenOffice on them. And we were opening the slides in OpenOffice, and it was messing up the formatting of PowerPoint. And so, whereas Washington Post were using Windows PCs with Office on, and so they looked proper. And so it was literally just a file format error on these top secret classified documents. It made it look different, and people spent hours wondering why they looked differently, and we couldn't really give the answer. So we knew it was this dumb, innocuous thing. And so stuff like that video, it looks bad, there looks to be a format thing. There often is this stupid, mundane explanation. Now, perhaps this is the different one, but I think he killed himself. And I think when you look at the prison, what we know of the records that day, etc., it adds up to that. Because also, I don't see in what possible world you kill Epstein and then leave Ghislaine Maxwell alive for 6 years. Make that make sense. And so, both on the evidence and on the Occam's razor, I think he killed himself. But I really should stress, I don't think it's stupid to be suspicious about that. This is one of those where I think he killed himself because I spent ages looking into it. Like, it's not because it looks dodgy. It looks dodgy as hell.
It does absolutely look dodgy as hell. Look, we got one final question, very small question here, is from Spazalot, the last audience question, the only audience question, shall I say. He says, what I've been meaning to ask is, were there no drugs involved with Epstein, or is that to be presumed? Did he ply his victims with drugs? Were drugs involved in these stories?
Yes, in some, no in others. Some of it was just psychological pressure, etc. But yes, there was drug taking at these parties. It was available there. Anyone involved who had alcohol was underage. Drugs are obviously illegal. It was part of it. It was part of the social pressure. It doesn't seem to have been a systemic part of the routine in the same way that the recruitment, the massage, sort of, getting them as a masseuse, the classic things in the abuser's playbook. You do things to break down, you get people out of their support networks, and you do things to break down the usual barriers of propriety. You get people innocuous reasons to be around you without clothes, to be touching, to be, there is a whole systemic thing. I don't think people necessarily read this in a secret document, but time and time and time again, abusers do the same things. And this, all of this plays into that. Alcohol and drugs are disinhibitors. They were taken, they were involved. As I understand it, it wasn't a systemic part of it, but yes, we know they were present.
Well, listen, I wanted to thank you so much, James. You've given us an hour and 45 minutes of your time. You've answered our questions. You've filled us all in. I do want to say we would love to have you back again on this show to do a part 2 so we can keep going, because this story is going to run and run, we feel. One final thing is, I would say, if people want to read more of your work, I know I'm going to put a link to that article you've written about Ghislaine Maxwell. About Melania Trump. I'll put that in the show notes. But
there's
if you'd
one
like
about
to...
Melania Trump and there's one about Trump Epstein, I'll send them to you. I am James RB UK on Twitter, but I'm not there very much. I'm jamesrball.com on Blue Sky. I have a YouTube account somewhere which is got to start posting stuff, and I'm on Substack. So please find me on any of those things, or I am in the New World or the I newspapers weekly.
Thanks so much. Well, we'll let you get off. I know you want to go eat your dinner, so I will round off the show on my own. Thank you very much, and good night, James Ball. Double Pulitzer Prize winning James Ball there. So, listen, that was a cracking show. A huge audience response tonight. We've currently got, let me check, 7,300 viewers right now. So, if you're new to the show and you've enjoyed what again, it's been horrible material, but we've tried to keep the discussion as light as we can and try and talk about the important topics. If you've enjoyed the show, please do consider liking, following, subscribing. That would really, really help us. Comments, if you're watching on YouTube, you want to have a comment, throw us your thoughts. any bit of engagement really helps us grow. You can see I've only got like 400, 500 followers. So having such a low number, with people coming in, with thousands coming in and watching the show, it really does help us grow and spread. So hopefully we can bring you more of these kinds of interesting discussions. It's definitely been one of my favorite that we've had so far. I hope we've answered some of your questions. I've learned so much new that I didn't know tonight. Now, again, I am streaming to you live from Ukraine. There was a question earlier on in the chat about what's going on here, because there were 2 days of anti-government protests regarding this anti-corruption legislation change. I covered those protests for a couple of days. It looks like there's going to be some kind of compromise with the president's office pushing through another bill through the Rada, that's the Ukrainian parliament. So we'll see how the public react to that news, how they react to this bill. Zelensky says it's going to restore the independence of these anti-corruption bodies. Hopefully next week we will bring you. I haven't got the full list booked for next week yet. We've got some very interesting shows lined up, so do come in. We have got a Gaza episode next week. We're going to be talking about what's happening between Israel and Palestine at the moment, and particularly the awful humanitarian situation that is happening in Gaza, and that Israel is responsible for. And we're going to be talking about that responsibility under international law next week. So thanks again if you've watched any of the shows this week. If you're watching along on YouTube, please do hit that like and subscribe. If you're watching on Twitch, please do follow us. And if you're watching on Twitter for the first time, thank you for coming and watching this sort of 2-hour ad hoc show that we've done about the Epstein Files. I think we're all really interested in James's perspective on it, and we'd like to know much more about what's going on. So we'll definitely have James back on the show. And if you're just watching and you haven't checked out any of his work, I'll put links in the show notes, so you'll be able to go and see that if you're watching on catch up. But again, a huge number of people, thousands of people watching tonight, so thank you so much. Really appreciate everyone coming along and watching the show tonight. So tune in next week. We've got some really interesting guests lined up, and we'll keep bringing you those interesting guests week in, week out. I've been Oz Katerji. This has been the Oz Katerji Show. Thank you, everyone. And again, please do like and subscribe if you've enjoyed the show. Thank you and good night.